Coco, the bright green parrot, had always been a bundle of energy. With feathers that shimmered like emeralds in the sun and a voice as clear as a bell, she was the pride of the Saunders family. She would greet everyone in the morning with a cheerful squawk, repeat funny phrases she had learned, and playfully mimic the sound of the doorbell, causing bursts of laughter in the house. But over time, Coco's exuberance began to fade. Her once lush feathers became thin and ragged, and the energetic squawks grew quieter, almost mournful. Mrs. Saunders, Coco's devoted owner, first noticed the changes on a Monday morning. When she went to open the cage for Coco's usual greeting, she was met with silence. The parrot was perched on her favorite swing, eyes dull, staring blankly. "Are you okay, Coco?" Mrs. Saunders asked, her voice tinged with concern. The bird responded with a soft, almost inaudible squawk, and as Mrs. Saunders approached, she saw it. Coco had begun plucking at her own feathers. The feathers that had once been so vibrant were now scattered on the bottom of the cage, a sign that something was terribly wrong. Mrs. Saunders panicked. She had heard of stress-induced feather plucking syndrome in birds but had never thought it could happen to Coco. Coco had always been so healthy, so happy. What could have caused this sudden change? Worried and confused, Mrs. Saunders rushed Coco to Dr. Emily Bryant, the family's trusted avian veterinarian. Dr. Bryant was a warm and kind woman, known for her expertise in exotic pets. After a careful examination, Dr. Bryant confirmed what Mrs. Saunders had feared. "Coco has feather plucking syndrome," she explained gently. "It's a behavioral issue that often stems from stress, anxiety, or a lack of mental stimulation. Birds are highly intelligent, and when they become bored, isolated, or anxious, they can start plucking their feathers." Mrs. Saunders felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She had always loved Coco, but had she been neglecting her in some way? Could it be the recent changes in the household that had triggered the plucking? The Saunders family had just moved into a new home, and Coco had been placed in a different room to make space for the new baby. The move had been stressful, and the baby's cries seemed to unsettle the bird, but Mrs. Saunders didn't think it could affect Coco so profoundly. Dr. Bryant continued, "We'll need to work together to help Coco. The goal is to provide her with the right kind of environment, routine, and activities to reduce her stress and give her an outlet for her natural instincts. But it will take time, patience, and dedication." Mrs. Saunders nodded, determined to help her beloved parrot. She couldn't bear to see Coco suffer any longer. The next morning, Mrs. Saunders began Coco's new routine. She started by placing Coco in a larger, more spacious cage with plenty of room to fly and move around. The cage was placed near a large window where Coco could watch the world outside, giving her a view of the trees and the occasional squirrel darting across the lawn. She even added a few new toys to Coco's cage, brightly colored swings, ropes to climb, and foraging puzzles designed to engage the bird's mind. But despite these changes, Coco still sat on her perch, looking disinterested. The feather plucking didn't stop. Mrs. Saunders turned to Dr. Bryant for guidance. "We've made some changes, but it's not helping. She's still plucking." Dr. Bryant nodded thoughtfully. "It's a step in the right direction, but now we need to work on behavioral therapy. I'll show you some techniques to engage Coco and help her form a new, healthier routine. Birds need mental stimulation, and we can't expect instant results." One of the techniques Dr. Bryant suggested was positive reinforcement training. "We'll start with simple commands," she explained. "When Coco follows a command, even if it's just a small gesture, reward her with a treat or praise. This will create a bond between you and Coco and help her feel more secure." Mrs. Saunders spent hours each day working with Coco, teaching her to step up onto her finger on command, and rewarding her with a special treat. At first, Coco seemed indifferent, but after a few sessions, something remarkable happened. Coco stepped up for the first time, and when Mrs. Saunders praised her, Coco's eyes lit up for the briefest moment. It was a small victory, but it gave Mrs. Saunders hope. The next step in the journey was environmental enrichment. Dr. Bryant stressed how important it was to create a dynamic environment for Coco, where she could explore and interact with different elements every day. "Birds need variety," she said. "Changing their surroundings and offering new experiences can prevent boredom and reduce anxiety." Over the next few weeks, Mrs. Saunders made sure to rotate Coco's toys regularly, adding new ones and rearranging the layout of the cage. She also began to play music and let Coco listen to nature sounds, which seemed to calm the parrot down. But despite the changes, Coco's feathers continued to fall, and Mrs. Saunders was unsure if her efforts were enough. But one day, as Mrs. Saunders entered the room to check on Coco, something incredible happened. Coco was standing on her perch, not plucking her feathers, but preening them carefully, as if she were grooming herself like she had done before. It was the first sign of progress in weeks. Mrs. Saunders smiled with tears in her eyes. This was just the beginning of Coco's healing journey. She knew the road ahead would be long, but they were on the right path. However, as Coco's condition improved, new challenges began to emerge. There were moments when Mrs. Saunders felt overwhelmed by the weight of Coco's recovery. Could she continue to provide the right environment and support? Would Coco ever truly recover, or was she destined to be a bird forever marked by her trauma? These questions haunted her late into the night, but she couldn't give up now. She had to remain hopeful, for Coco's sake. And so, the next chapter in Coco's story began, full of hope, uncertainty, and the promise of a better future. As the weeks passed, Coco's condition seemed to improve, but slowly and in small increments. Mrs. Saunders was cautiously optimistic. There were good days and bad days. On some mornings, Coco would preen her feathers, looking almost like the joyful parrot she had once been. On other days, she would retreat to the back of her cage, staring out the window with a distant, almost sad expression in her eyes. Mrs. Saunders felt a deep ache in her heart every time Coco seemed to regress, but she refused to give up. With Dr. Bryant's guidance, they had established a solid routine. Each day was filled with activities to keep Coco's mind engaged. Mrs. Saunders would spend time teaching her new tricks, simple things like waving a wing or saying her name on command. These small victories felt monumental. They were signs of progress, a sign that Coco's spark hadn't completely dimmed. One particularly cold afternoon, as Mrs. Saunders was preparing Coco's favorite treat, fresh apple slices and sunflower seeds, she noticed something new. Coco was pacing back and forth in her cage, something she hadn't done in a long time. It was subtle at first, but Mrs. Saunders could tell the bird was restless. She wondered if it was a sign that Coco needed something more. More activity, more stimulation, more freedom. Perhaps it was time for a new phase in Coco's recovery, something outside of the cage. Dr. Bryant had mentioned that sometimes, the right kind of outdoor exposure could help birds regain their sense of wonder and joy. Coco had always loved the feeling of the wind ruffling her feathers, and the house had a lovely garden. Maybe, just maybe, being outside in the fresh air would help. The next morning, Mrs. Saunders carefully set up a small, secure bird stand in the garden. The stand was built with safety in mind. Coco couldn't fly away, but she could enjoy the sunshine and the sights of the garden. The sight of flowers in bloom, the flutter of butterflies, and the soft sound of leaves rustling in the breeze seemed to capture Coco's attention. At first, Coco was hesitant, unsure of this new environment. She clung to her perch, eyeing the world around her with uncertainty. But then, as the sun touched her feathers, something magical happened. Coco let out a loud squawk of delight and flapped her wings, a sound that made Mrs. Saunders gasp in joy. It was as if the parrot had rediscovered something, her instinct, her need to explore, her joy of being alive. As the days grew warmer, Mrs. Saunders made it a point to take Coco outside each morning. She'd set up the bird stand near the rose bushes, where the air was sweet with the scent of blooming flowers. At first, Coco remained on her perch, taking in her surroundings, but with each passing day, she became more adventurous. She would spread her wings and hop around the stand, watching the birds in the trees and the squirrels racing up and down the trunks. On one particularly bright morning, something incredible happened. Mrs. Saunders was sitting next to Coco, chatting softly to her, when the parrot spread her wings wide and took a short flight, just a few feet, but it was enough. Coco soared through the air with such grace, landing gently on a nearby branch. It was the first time in months that Coco had flown freely, and Mrs. Saunders couldn't help but laugh with joy. "You did it, Coco. You're flying again," she cheered. Coco's eyes twinkled with pride, her feathers glinting in the sunlight as she preened them. She looked different, more alive, more vibrant. It was a sign that all the hard work, the therapy, the new routines, and the patient love from Mrs. Saunders had been worth it. But even as Coco began to show signs of improvement, there were still challenges. Mrs. Saunders realized that Coco's recovery wasn't going to be linear. There were moments when Coco's anxiety would spike again, on days when there was too much noise or when a neighbor's dog would bark loudly, startling Coco. Sometimes, Coco would revert back to her old behavior of plucking a feather or two when the stress became overwhelming. It was during one of these setbacks that Mrs. Saunders came up with a new idea: more structured playtime. Instead of just offering toys in her cage, she would engage Coco in interactive play. This included things like teaching Coco to play with a toy bell or using treat dispensing toys that encouraged Coco to work for her food. The goal was to keep Coco's mind constantly engaged and provide an outlet for her natural instincts, like foraging, which might have been stifled during her earlier stress. Dr. Bryant was supportive of this new approach. Coco needs to be constantly challenged in a healthy way, she explained. The key is to make her feel in control of her environment while also ensuring she has the chance to be playful and curious. And so, every evening after dinner, Mrs. Saunders would set up a small obstacle course in the living room. Coco loved the challenge, hopping over tiny bridges, weaving through hoops, and playing tug-of-war with a soft rope. Sometimes, she would even find hidden treats and excitedly squawk in delight when she discovered them. As weeks turned into months, Coco began to regain her confidence. The feather plucking had significantly decreased, though Mrs. Saunders knew they weren't completely out of the woods yet. There would always be the possibility of relapses, but they had come so far. One evening, as Coco sat on Mrs. Saunders' shoulder, happily nibbling on a sunflower seed, she let out a familiar, sweet whistle. Mrs. Saunders smiled. It was the same tune Coco used to whistle every morning when she was healthy and carefree. "I think we're almost there, Coco," Mrs. Saunders whispered softly. "You're going to be okay." Months later, on the anniversary of Coco's recovery, Mrs. Saunders looked back on everything they had been through. The bird who had once been covered in broken feathers, withdrawn, and stressed, was now the picture of health, her feathers vibrant, her spirit lively. The road had been difficult, but every moment of struggle had been worth it. And though the journey wasn't completely over, there would always be more to learn and ways to improve. Coco had shown her owner, and herself, that recovery was possible. They had built a new life together, one of understanding, patience, and, most of all, love. The bird who had once been lost in her own stress was now free, and it was all because of the bond they had formed through their efforts. Mrs. Saunders knew that, as long as they stuck together, no challenge was too great. And so, with a final, joyous squawk, Coco spread her wings and took flight once again, this time soaring high into the sky with the wind beneath her feathers, ready for whatever adventures lay ahead.